Welcome back everybody, this is King Kong 9100, and if you haven't seen it, I made a video on how I would have done Godzilla King of the Monsters. Well, now it's time for a video on how I would do Godzilla vs Kong, but be sure to watch the latest video to be caught up. I won't be covering most of the human stuff, but just remember, it does retain most characters from King of the Monsters. Dr. Sarazawa would still be alive as well, and just keep in mind the fact that adult Kong is around 340 feet tall, and his design would be much like Monstatron's Kong design. I haven't really said this before, but my design of Kong would be just like the one that I showed, Monstatron's Kong design, but my personal design, his head would be shaped just like 1976 or 2005 King Kong's head shape. The face shape would be like 1962 Kong's face, where it's like very long. The teeth, King Kong would have, I'm gonna call him King Kong in the film, like afterwards, but he would have many teeth, but his fangs would be huge, and the smaller teeth would be jagged, like very jagged. So yeah, that is my Kong design. He's 340 feet tall. We got all the characteristics down, let's get right into it. So the film would start out with Kong noticing that Titans are leaving Skull Island when they hear King Ghidorah's call, and he heard it as well. But he's just absolutely pissed because of the many skull crawlers awakening. Not only skull crawlers, but there would be other massive deadly kaiju that are awakening. But during King of the Monsters, it's going to be explained that he's fighting all of these kaiju because of King Ghidorah's call. He has to keep order, and he can't let kaiju leave and take over the earth, you know? So we'd start with the Titan following that Godzilla now has. He keeps the monsters in check, and he's seen as a savior. When Godzilla roared as the new alpha, the skull crawlers all heard this, so all the other kaiju as well as them are leaving Skull Island. We would cut to Rodan, who's battling the military mid-air, and during this battle they all get taken off track. They enter this fog, and then eventually there's more fog, and then lightning, and then suddenly they're on an island. Rodan defeats most of the jets, and some of the jets crash land onto the island, which is barely seen. Rodan roars in the air. One soldier would take off his helmet and look at the island he's on. There's jagged rocky mountains, there's gigantic trees that are nearly 200 to 300 feet high, many swamps and chasms. It's just, you know, it's dark, it's stormy, and he calls his base and he requests the pickup. Monarch would eventually find his location, but they would be shocked when they find where he is, Skull Island. So this soldier is on Skull Island, but it's a much more evolved and stormy Skull Island, and it resembles 2005 Skull Island a lot more than the really bad 2017 Skull Island. In the timeline, 1973 Skull Island was much more vibrant and lively, and now it's just a hellish area. The credits would start, and later on in the film we would see Rodan. He lands and notices this island is unlike anything he's ever seen. He roars a calling to his fellow new Titans. Methuselah and Behemoth arrive. Kong is pissed because he's still fighting other monsters, but he arrives and sees these three Titans were causing chaos on the island. You know, maybe you have Methuselah like destroying the Iwi wall, and Behemoth is just destroying the terrain. We see that Kong is way older and way bigger. He is 340 feet tall. Kong is absolutely pissed due to the skull crawlers and all these vicious kaiju waking up. You know, he's ticked. Kong roars at them, and they all roar back a challenge to Kong in order to defend Godzilla. Now Kong sees the damage they caused, and he only gets way angrier than he already is. He roars and fights the three Titans at once. He defeats all three of these guys. He defeats Rodan, Methuselah, and Behemoth. The audience sees that he's an absolute badass, and everybody now knows he can clearly go head-to-head against Godzilla. Eventually, Godzilla arrives on Skull Island. Now, as if the battle wasn't already personal enough because of the Alpha call, Godzilla tears through the Iwi wall and he kills many of them. Now Kong is pissed, and now it's personal. It would be explained that Godzilla did not notice the humans dying. He's just too big to notice the humans. But he does need to keep natural order, and there cannot be two alphas, with the exception of Rodan. Kong and Godzilla would clash, and in this fight you would see that they are so evenly matched. But while they're fighting, Kong would notice they're causing too much destruction. There's a moment in the battle where Godzilla would grab Kong by the neck, and because of Godzilla's shorter arm length, they're incredibly close to each other. Kong is trying to shake himself loose, and he knows that because of how close he is, he's going to get bit in the face by Godzilla. So Kong catches Godzilla's jaws and starts prying them open. And Godzilla can't do anything because he's in like a little bit of a tight spot right now. Kong starts like prying open, and because he got immensely strong, he ends up forcingly unhinging Godzilla's jaws. And Kong notices that it's an unhingeable jaw, so what happens is that Kong starts prying it even further, and his arms are incredibly long, so that helps with this. Kong ends up prying open the already unhinged jaws, and then we start seeing blood trickle down the corner of Godzilla's mouth. So now Godzilla has to use his last resort. We start hearing his atomic breath charge up, and Godzilla's eyes start glowing, his mouth starts glowing, his throat even starts glowing. Kong notices this, but he starts shaking himself loose, and he ends up punching Godzilla before the atomic breath can be fired. Not that he knew it was going to be fired, but because it just took too long for Godzilla to charge it up. And I really hope they highlight that that is a problem that Godzilla has. His atomic breath takes a while to charge up. After like a long battle where they're so evenly matched, they end up battling each other off of a cliff, just like in the original. Except, the different thing is we would get to see an underwater battle. But before this battle ends, because Godzilla would win underwater, we would just see the water light up, and then we would just see blood. We do not know who won this underwater battle. But underwater, you maybe have like a submarine or something. Be it the military or a group of terrorists like Alan Jonah's group, would unleash a bunch of missiles to try and hit the kaiju. And they end up hitting the side of an underwater mountain. Basically, Kong would see this, and he would end up destroying that part of the underwater mountain, and he would basically take shelter. So it's discovered that there's this opening in that underwater mountain ground, which Kong may have taken. And they eventually managed to trap Kong in the hollow earth. So Kong is still trapped in the hollow earth due to possibly Alan Jonah. But what happened is he would break through the ground underwater and swim to the surface until he breaks out of the ground and rises up into what is either Tokyo or New York. It really depends on what kind of setting you want. And it would be like a sort of sunset kind of setting. Kong does not know where he is, so an all-out military assault takes place. Kong is hit by jets and missiles, but unlike Godzilla, who would just take this military assault and keep walking, Kong would retaliate. He doesn't know where he is, he couldn't go back home because of the humans, and he's just furious. He's scared, he's angry, he's in pain, and we end up seeing him destroy the military and many buildings out of anger. This is something we've never seen in a King Kong film. King Kong, 340 feet tall, he's very big, an incredibly pissed King Kong destroying buildings and being just, scared. He's angry and he doesn't know where he is, so he destroys buildings, but then he stops when he sees innocent human beings dying. And he's then surprised when he sees the female character who he has a connection with throughout the entirety of the film in Tokyo on a rooftop yelling at him saying, "Kong, you need to stop, people are dying." So he starts helping with lifting rubble off, and people are just very surprised. He lifts her up and he feels the need to protect her. But then throughout the city we hear Godzilla's roar. Godzilla returns to restore balance and keep Kong in check. He roars at Kong, who sets down the female, and Godzilla roars like we've never heard. This is an incredibly terrifying roar, and it almost sounds like a horror movie scream, but it's still Godzilla's roar. And even after this incredibly scary scream, Kong will not bend the knee. So it's a sunset in Tokyo, but Kong and Godzilla duke it out until nighttime. And this nighttime would resemble the King Kong vs. Godzilla Good Times DVD cover, where it's like red flames are everywhere and the night sky is purple. We would see Kong use buildings and try to throw them whole at Godzilla. It would be like that. He would pull a pipeworks and he throws a whole ass building at Godzilla. He would blind Godzilla and he would hold Godzilla by the tail. And he's struggling, but Godzilla would swing around and Kong would be holding on the tail so tight that he'd end up flying over and hitting the ground. Kong would get stomped on, tail whipped, and Godzilla would also get punched very badly and flipped and swung from his tail. All of these moves would be pulled. Kong would be able to take the atomic breath and keep fighting because Kong's skin is just so incredibly thick. The best thing about this matchup would be Kong doesn't have any powers, so he just has an incredibly thick skin and insane amount of strength in order to combat Godzilla, in addition to his intelligence, speed, agility, experience, all of that good stuff. The two are now incredibly weak. Kong stands on the left, Godzilla stands on the right. There's a bit of a distance between them. Godzilla and Kong know they can keep going at it, but Kong starts holding up his arm. He's so weak, he's hunched over. He holds up his arm, one arm out against Godzilla. The other arm is covering the humans. Godzilla sees that Kong is just merely defending the humans. Godzilla notices this, and that's a sign of his intelligence, but Kong will not bend the knee, and that's a problem to Godzilla. So Kong is like barely standing, and Godzilla is still weak, but he needs to keep Kong in check. So he tail whips Kong to his knees, and we just see a bloody, battered, bruised Kong on one knee. Godzilla weakly stands over him, but roars as he swipes downwards to knock Kong out. But then Kong would catch Godzilla's hands. He would shakily rise up against Godzilla, and Godzilla notices this, and he's in utter shock and disbelief. And Kong would roar a roar of defiance. He will not give in, he will not back down, he will not bow. But it's unacceptable to Godzilla, so Godzilla kicks Kong backwards and then tail whips his jaw, knocking Kong out completely. Godzilla is so exhausted he takes 2 steps and he roars, but then he just passes out due to the sheer exhaustion. Kong would wake up first, but he will not kill Godzilla. Instead, he just goes home, because Kong knows he needs Godzilla to survive. He needs Godzilla to keep the Titans in check. Godzilla would wake up and see that Kong is leaving. Godzilla roars and Kong roars back. Godzilla knows that he needs Kong to keep the skull crawlers and all the kaiju on Skull Island, because there are more kaiju than just skull crawlers. There's insanely deadly kaiju there that are as big, if not bigger than Kong, way bigger than Kong. And Kong is the one keeping Skull Island in check. So the two end up having a mutual respect for each other, and they go their separate ways. Kong has earned the title of King, and now there are 2 kings. Well, I guess you could say 3, because there's King Kong, Rodan, Mothra, and Godzilla. Kong is now called King Kong, and King Kong and Godzilla are shown as proper equals. Between Rodan, Mothra, Godzilla, and King Kong, there are 4 alphas. But among those 4 alphas, King Kong and Godzilla are the 2 kings. And that is it, everybody. That is how I would do Godzilla vs. Kong. Now, I like the idea that Kong would take on Methuselah, Behemoth, and Rodan at once, because it shows that, damn, he's fully grown and he's a badass. It would be an amazing fight, too. And I also want to see Kong take a military assault, because I just feel like Kong being a gigantic kaiju in a city is something that wasn't really explored. I would love to see him tear up cities and be furious, but eventually he would help the humans out since he knows they're innocent. But we do need to see him take a military assault, because if he can go up against Godzilla, he could take a bunch of missiles and jets and like explosions and bullets and shit like that. It would be like a Shin Godzilla military assault, but we would see Kong actually fights back incredibly well. Yeah, but the fight with him and Godzilla would be absolutely raw and visceral and just brutal. Kong would be taking multiple hits of the atomic breath, and Godzilla would be landing very brutal shots on Kong. In the end, Godzilla would have great character development. Godzilla at the start of the film would be very closed off to the idea that there can be 2 alphas. After the fight with Kong, he gains respect for Kong. He doesn't fight Kong after he wakes up. That would be a very good movie in my opinion. Let me know what you guys think and how you would do Godzilla vs. Kong. Go ahead and leave a like, comment, and subscribe for more. This is King Kong 9100 signing out. See ya.